You're listening to episode 64 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Matthew Tenney and Tim Gard join us to speak about their new book, The Mindfulness Edge: How to Rewire Your Brain for Leadership and Personal Excellence Without Adding to Your Schedule. We've heard a lot lately about mindfulness in the corporate world and how it helps employees deal with their inevitable stress that may be inherent to their jobs, as well as helping leaders grow in their own value to their profession. But doing so without adding mindfulness as just another technique, that requires the skilled insight and guidance of competent mindfulness teachers living in the business world. Matt Tenney works to develop highly effective leaders who achieve the extraordinary long-term business outcomes and live more fulfilling lives as a result of realizing high levels of self-mastery and more effectively serving and inspiring greatness in people around them. Matt's clients include Wells Fargo, Marriott, Keller Williams, Four Seasons, and many other companies, associations, and universities. Tim Gard, PhD, is a research fellow at the ETH, University Hospital Zurich, and the University of Zurich, Switzerland. His research focuses on the neural and psychological mechanisms of yoga and mindfulness meditation in a variety of contexts, including pain, depression, education, and aging. Tim conducted his research at leading centers in these fields, including the Lazar Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard Medical School, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, India, and the Ott Group at the Bender Institute of Neuroimaging in Germany. Tim was trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy at the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, USA. Our guests today are Matt Tenney. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ted.
And Tim Gard. Tim, nice to speak with you again.
Hi, nice to be here again. Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about the mindfulness edge, but before we get into that, I'd like both of you to say a little bit about your backgrounds. Tim, could we start with you and maybe have you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So by training, I'm a psychologist. Then for my PhD, my PhD is in neuroscience, and I investigated the neuromechanisms of mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. And actually, this interest and this topic brought me to several places, including the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in India. Actually, that was for my master's thesis. Then to Ulrich Ott's lab in Gießen, Germany, and to Sarah Lazar's lab, where I spent quite a bit of time in Boston. And about a year ago, I finished my PhD finally in Maastricht, Netherlands, and now I just moved to Zurich in Switzerland to continue my research, actually, to further investigate the neuromechanisms of mindfulness and yoga.
Wonderful. Congratulations on completing that PhD work. And it was your terrific work in Sarah Lazar's lab, which is how we first met. So shout out to Sarah.
Yes, definitely.
And Matt, tell us a bit about your background.
It's not nearly as stellar as Tim's. Tim is the smart one of this group.
Come on. I disagree. I disagree, Matt.
I do work with leaders of different organizations, whether they be nonprofit, for-profit, universities, and helping them to be more effective, not just in the workplace by better serving and caring for team members, but also developing self-mastery using mindfulness, so that they're more effective in their personal lives. And the main effort, the main reason why I like to do that is, of course, I'd like to help people in the conventional sense, help people to be more effective professionally, but I'm more concerned with developing human beings who are kind and compassionate and have high levels of patience and empathy. So I kind of see that, working as a professional speaker and a trainer as an opportunity to reach people who have a lot of influence and bring practices to them that might then filter out through their organizations, and in the hopes of making their organization better as a whole, but even the community better as a whole.
Thanks for that. And how did you two meet? What made you decide to collaborate? Matt, maybe you can tell that story.
Yeah, so, when I was working on this book, I realized that there is just such an abundance of neuroscience that is suggesting very strongly that mindfulness training is changing not only the function of the brain, but also the physical structure of the brain. And I was aware of some of this research. You've already mentioned Sarah Lazar. I think she's probably one of the more well-known members of that camp, in the neuroscience camp, that are doing such great work. And I had actually reached out to Sarah and said, "Hey, this is the book idea that I have. It's going to be published by John Wiley and Sons. Here's the timeline. Would you like to collaborate on this? Because I think the book would have a lot more weight if it's not just dumb Matt Tenney, who's, maybe has some experience with mindfulness, but is certainly not a neuroscientist. If there's a neuroscientist who offers their side of the story of, well, here's what the research is actually saying, and here's the most recent research." And so Sarah replied back very kindly and just said, "I'm sorry, I have to decline. I'm just too busy." And I thought that was it. And I was in talks with several other neuroscientists as well. And then about 3 or 4 days later, I just got an email out of the blue where she said, "I was thinking about this, and there's a fellow member of our lab who I think would be great. He really wants to bring mindfulness to the business world. Let me connect you with him." And so Tim and I, he was doing his postdoctoral work in the Netherlands, and we didn't have a chance to meet in person, but we had I think it was about a 2.5-hour Skype session the first time we talked. And I could just tell that he was an absolutely awesome human being. He's very well versed in the practice of mindfulness. I can sense his wisdom. I can sense his compassion, but I also got a sense that he's very precise, and he was going to make sure that, I didn't overstate any of the research, that we weren't overstepping our bounds. And he proved that to be, that was definitely how he operates. So I kind of think of Tim as like the bad cop, like I'm trying to make all these arguments like mindfulness can do this and mindfulness can do that. And Tim said, "No, Matt, the research doesn't support that. Let's find research that is really strong. That study that you cited is a little weak. Let's just use this one instead because it was better controlled, and, this, that, and the other thing." So we hit it off, and it's been a joy to work with him. I think he's made the book. I mean, I don't know how to quantify it, but I would say multiple orders of better. So, 3-4 times better than it would have been had I just written it by myself.
Thank you for sharing that story. And Tim, I want to follow up with you a little bit on some of what Matt had said about really being mindful of the hype and some of the overpromising that we see, which is, I've almost never seen this from researchers like yourself and Sarah and many others who care about it. They're always very circumspect and very clear about what the studies indicate, and are very good about not writing sensationalized popular articles. They're doing research, and journalists tend to make things bad by saying things that are just not so. So, Tim, did you have a little bit of challenge sometimes with keeping things reined in when you would really want to share some exciting new findings that were nonetheless just not quite solid enough to share or draw any conclusions from? What was that like for you?
Actually, yeah, you're totally right. I mean, as a scientist, you're always really careful to not overstate things. And since this is a a more popular or trade book. I'm not sure what the right term for this, but it's for a wider audience. You also don't want to write sentences such as you do in science, like this possibly might have effects on this and that. So the way we work with this is first of all filtering in using or citing the stronger research. And we used a lot of footnotes in which we also show the other side of the findings, because there indeed is this or was this tension to being able to say something, but also being true to the state of the evidence. Yeah, we were really mindful of that, and this was a wonderful project actually. Also normally in research you're relatively focused on a narrow topic area, but here Matt basically covered such a vast area. So I also expanded my reading and looking beyond my horizon in science basically. So it was a really exciting journey. And I really hope that I did a good job in being the bad cop, as Matt nicely said, and that we indeed didn't overstate anything.
So tell us about the premise of the book. What's the focus? Matt, why don't we start with you on that?
I guess the essence that I wanted to get across is there's a few elements to that. One is just that, what is mindfulness? I think there's so much written about it, and you had mentioned kind of all of the hype that's out there, and how the press twists studies and says this and that and the other thing, and it seems that mindfulness can do everything, which it can't. It can do a lot, but it can't do everything, and there's also seems to be this kind of vagueness around, well, what exactly is it? And I think the popular conception is that it's some, pull out of your pocket stress reduction tool by watching your breath go in and out. And of course, mindfulness of breathing is a wonderful practice, but one of the things that I wanted to achieve with the book is to offer a very clear, usable idea of what mindfulness is. And for me, that's simply shifting from being our thinking mind, being the thoughts that are running through our head, to being aware of our thoughts. And that is I think it's very easy for people to understand all the benefits that can come from that. There's a lot of freedom that comes when you're no longer constrained by your thinking and constrained by your programming, but you can actually observe it objectively. Because when you can observe it objectively, it's no longer controlling you, and there's choice in how you respond to things, much more so than when you're caught in it. So that's kind of how we open it, is I wanted to create a very accessible but highly practical understanding of what mindfulness is, beyond just this idea of some corporate stress reduction tool. We touch very lightly actually on stress reduction. It's almost as an afterthought. And we focus on much more profound effects of what mindfulness can do. The secondary focus, and I guess it's along the same lines of making it very practical, is that, the subtitle of the book is How to Rewire Your Brain for Leadership and Personal Excellence Without Adding to Your Schedule. So kind of coming back to that idea of, mindfulness is you have to go to some quiet place and sit still for an hour, or go on a week-long retreat and not talk. Of course, there are great benefits to those practices as well. But what I wanted to make very clear, which I don't think has been done a whole lot, at least in the kind of business context of how mindfulness is applied, is that there's nothing special about it. I mean, this is an inherent human quality, capacity, to simply shift from our being programmed, our programmed way of being, to being awake. And we can do that while brushing our teeth. We can do that while washing our hands, while doing the dishes, while commuting to work. And to me, the beauty of that is that there's this huge paradigm shift that we can transform activities that for many of us we see as wastes of time, that are at a minimum mundane or boring or even unpleasant, and at a maximum can be quite frustrating, for instance, sitting in traffic. And we can transform those things into opportunities to literally change both the function and structure of our brains in ways that improve a variety of leadership skills, which is what we touch on in the book, is how does mindfulness help improve decision making? How does it help improve emotional intelligence, leadership presence, innovation, and then, of course, happiness. So there's definitely a personal component to this. But But that's the focus, is to make this so practical and so non-mystical and mysterious that your average mid-level manager could just pick up the book and say, oh, I get this, and I see how I could start today without having to add anything to my schedule.
Well said. Thank you, Matt. And Tim, for you, was there anything you wanted to add to that? And perhaps what was it like for you to explore mindfulness in this business setting a little bit more, supported by science?
Yeah, for me, this was a very, very interesting project and journey, actually, because of its vastness, its wideness. It had a much larger scope than my own research normally has. And at the same time, I think mindfulness really, as Matt also said, it is a basic quality. It is something. It's a shift in perspective. It's just relating differently to the usual things, and I think it's something that is applicable in many settings, not only in the business world or in leadership. So in that way, mindfulness is mindfulness. Whether it's used to deal with aging or to help kids and teachers in schools, whether it's used for pain management or to prevent a relapse to depression, it's the same shift, just used in different contexts. So in that way, it was a familiar territory, but it was nice to see the links and to see more closely what is playing in the business world, in the leadership.
The science is the same, really, regardless of the context in which mindfulness is being practiced.
If we look at the neuroscience, then there is hardly anything that has been conducted in the context of leadership yet. So this is all research that is conducted in different in other areas, basically. But as mindfulness is something so broad, so basic, it is applicable to the leadership world as well, yeah.
Tim, I want to stay with you for a minute on the next question, asking what do you see as one of the most difficult challenges for integrating mindfulness into daily life?
I think it's getting easier with practice, but making a first commitment, making time for the formal practice until it really becomes a routine and finds a place in life and transfers into daily activities. That's the challenge. Because I agree that this with the subtitle, without adding to your schedule, but this is more later on in the training. I mean, you can take little steps, but certainly in the beginning, formal training is required, and even later in the training.
Matt, how about for you? What do you see as one of the most difficult challenges for integrating mindfulness into daily life?
The greatest challenge is the structure that's created by our society, I guess, kind of how we're funneled through our days. I think we are so overtasked and so overburdened with information being thrown at us. It makes it very hard to simply remember to be awake and to not just be reacting to the next thing, which is the antithesis of being mindful. It's, if we're just, something pops up, we react, something pops up, we react. And I think with the advent of just the increase in our use of technology, that is probably the biggest challenge, is that we're being more and more conditioned to be almost like Pavlov's dog, where a text goes ding and we start drooling and have to look at it, and email goes ding and we have to go look at it. And it's very easy to get caught up in that react mode because those things are so stimulating. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. And that's why I really wanted to focus on a very simple framework for starting the practice, which is to make a list of all of these activities that you have to do anyhow every day, like brushing your teeth and washing your hands and making your bed and getting dressed, and just picking one. Just pick one to start with and try to do that for a week. Because if you can start building on just a very small piece of success, what I've discovered, and I think many people have realized this in their lives, is that you can build off of something small. Whereas if somebody says, "Oh, this is the most awesome thing ever." In fact, one of my corporate clients ran into this issue. Mindfulness made so much sense to him that he just said, "I'm going to block off 45 minutes every morning to sit still and do this practice." And he just about drove himself crazy because his concept of the practice from other books that he had read was that he was supposed to clear his mind of thinking and just have this mind that was just empty and fully present. And so, I tried to help him realize that that's not the goal. The goal is to simply recognize what's happening, regardless of whether there's thinking or not. And the only goal is to maintain that for just a very brief time, whether it could just be one in breath and then one out breath. And if you can do that, you start with these very small steps, then you can make some progress. And so he actually made this big shift where he cut his sitting still time down to, I think, about 10 minutes and started focusing much more on his daily activities. And then he started to notice real growth in the practice. And then building on that success of, okay, I am able to do this without going crazy. I'm able to do this during daily activities fairly well. Then he started to grow back into expanding the practice from there instead of being almost ready to quit because he was overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think that's a very good cautionary tale, is taking things in small bites, in manageable bites, so that you don't run into a disappointment based on just an innocent misunderstanding of what we might be doing here, and why having some guidance in this, whether it's a teacher or a good book, to just get you started. And then as your practice grows and you learn more, really working more with a teacher to help keep you in a practice that's really going to be a wellspring of beneficence in your life and the lives of others. So I also wanted to go into what is the most important thing for readers to get out of a mindfulness practice, if we even want to think of it as getting something out of it. Matt, what would you say is one of the more important things?
Yeah, I would say that that's very difficult language, as I'm sure you caught right away. There is so much to get out of the practice, but I think, as you're very well aware, the most important in any moment that we're making the effort to practice is to be not seeking to get anything, to have just this complete, open, non-seeking, non-judgmental recognition of what is actually occurring right now within my mind, within this body, within the space around me, without trying to get anywhere or change anything. And if we do that, then there are many benefits. So with that in mind, what I think is the most important thing to get out of at least our book, The Mindfulness Edge. And I would hope that if anybody listening to this is relatively new to the practice, and by relatively new, I mean you've been practicing less than 5 years, because if you read a lot, like I know when I had been about 5 years in, I'd probably read about 100 books on the practice, and there's just all these techniques, do this or do that. And I was confused as to what I should do when and which one's the best. And so this is what I would like people to take away. If you're relatively new, is just remember, if you can always remember the essence of the practice, which is just this. It's just to have this curious, open, receptive awareness, just like you're a child, and just be very curious about your experience, what's happening within you, what's happening around you. If you can do that, just that, and you can remember to sustain that for maybe it's one in breath or one out breath, or if you're doing an activity like brushing your teeth, if you can make the effort to sustain that attitude of having a beginner's mind, of that curious, childlike mind, just for the duration of brushing your teeth, that's where you'll notice the biggest effect. The practice becomes very, very easy if we remember that that attitude is the essence of the practice. It's not any particular technique. It's not any particular benefit or getting anywhere. It's in this moment, what's happening now, with a curious openness, and remembering to come back to that now and now and now, as often as we can remember to. And so that's kind of what we put forward as the core idea of the book, is changing our default. So if our default state, which interestingly corresponds to what many in neuroscience call the default network, a neural network, is just this state of kind of being caught in our thinking, self-referential, mind wandering. That's kind of our default. Whenever we're not engaged in intentionally thinking or intentionally doing something, we're lost in thought. And so our suggestion is, as often as you can remember to, just come back to not being lost in thought. Come back to this curious mind of a beginner.
Tim, how about for you? What do you think is one of the most important things for readers to get out of the book?
To be honest, there is not much to add. Exactly what Matt is saying. I mean, that is the act and the essence, to be mindful, to practice mindfulness, which results being in a state of mindfulness. And if you want to put more an outcome label on it, I would call it sustainable well-being. This very state of being curious and being aware, just being awake, that is a state of sustainable well-being, eudaimonic well-being.
So this book is very much also a leadership and a performance book. And Matt, I'd like to ask how you respond to the suggestion that this application of mindfulness towards leadership, performance, business type of needs is perhaps ethically challenged. How would you respond to that?
Well, I can certainly understand when people say that, especially if what you mean. Could you explain what you mean by ethically challenged? Can you just give me a little more detail? I presume to know, but I'd prefer to have a beginner's mind. And
I think that's a very good question, and one that I often ask myself when I hear that question and that really accusation that we shouldn't teach mindfulness in corporations because it's just about greed. It's just about making workers able to tolerate more of the bad circumstances they're in and not change the structure of what they're in. And that's ethically bad because that's not what mindfulness is for. Mm-hmm. So my question back to them is always, well, what exactly do you think helping people with their suffering is? Help me understand that. And I don't get much of a response. So I'm curious to unpack this a little bit with you as well.
Yeah, I think that would be, if it was phrased to me in that way, I would say, oh, so you don't think that corporations should offer healthy food for their employees to eat because that's just a reason to make them more energetic so they can get more work done? Yeah, you definitely shouldn't have a wellness program because, God forbid, people have a lower resting heart rate and lower blood pressure and are more alert while they're working and sleep better at night and have less risk of disease. I mean, that's terrible. But if it was phrased a little bit differently, I can understand that there's this. I think what the issue is, at least what I've seen, is people are saying you're basically taking something that is very deep and you're making it so watered down and so superficial that it is just another tool in the corporate toolbox of a way to get ahead faster. And I think that that's a valid concern. I think there are, especially in kind of short form media, like a lot of blog posts and shorter articles, maybe not so much books, but there may be some that I'm not aware of. I think that is happening where people are saying like, hey, this is just another tool in the corporate toolbox. So I can only speak from my perspective. And as from our title, you would probably gather, I'm making a pretty bold claim, and I am making a connection between mindfulness and how it improves business acumen, how it improves emotional intelligence, leadership presence, innovation. And we're connecting that with what the training is doing with the brain and how it's changing the brain. But from my experience, this is the way that I look at it, is I would say my main reason for doing the work that I do is I would like our world to be a better place. Now, if I wanted to go, if it's okay with you, I'll take a minute and go a little bit deeper with that. So I'm going to say this very briefly. So this may seem a bit trite or oversimplified, but we could always unpack it if you like, or I imagine if people were to think about this more deeply, I think you can see that this is the case. And that is that, if we wanted to make a world, let's just envision that our goal was to make a world that was free of unnecessary suffering, things like poverty, violence, the unnecessary suffering that comes around being sick. How would we create a world like that? And, maybe our first thoughts are, oh, well, what if we just eliminated all of these problems with great nonprofit work or something? So to make that oversimplified, let's say we could just snap our fingers and tomorrow every weapon on the planet would disappear. All the resources would be equally distributed, so everyone would have equal access to medicine and food and education and housing. That would be great, unless you're a hunter. You might want your weapon if you're a hunter. But generally speaking, that would be great. No one could hurt each other. No one would be at a deficit for resources. So, but then the follow-up question is, well, how long would that last? If all you've done is fix the symptoms of an underlying disease, but you haven't fixed the cause of it, how long would that last? And I would say at best 50 years before the world is back to all of the greedy people hoarding resources for themselves, all the violent people finding ways to hurt each other and subjugate others. So the root of all of this unnecessary suffering, like violence and poverty, is actually the human mind. It's an unhealthy human mind that is overly self-centered. And I think when we realized that, we realized that if we wanted to create the conditions for a permanent end to poverty and violence and other unnecessary suffering, the only way that happens is if every human mind, or at least the vast majority of human minds on the planet, are healthy, and people have high levels of kindness and compassion and generosity, and see that helping my neighbor is actually helping me, seeing how interconnected we all are, having that wisdom. Now, so if we agree on that point, again, it's very oversimplified, but I think just for the sake of brevity, we'll leave it at that. If we agree on that point, that the human mind is really what needs to be changed, if we wanted to create such a world, then where do we start? And where I decided would be the best place to start is with large organizations, which many of them tend to be companies. Because if we can bring the practice to a for-profit company, to the corporate world, then what happens is and Aetna is a great example of this. So the CEO of Aetna broke his neck and was in terrible pain, was going through rehab and started engaging in mindfulness practices and yoga, and realized great benefit and said, I want everyone in my company to have access to this. He didn't force it on anybody, but he made it available. And so now you have this huge organization. I don't know how many employees Aetna has. I would guess it's on the order of 50,000 plus. You have this organization of 50,000 people who are being paid to do practices that, yes, it can help them be more effective at work. It can help them to be more emotionally intelligent, to make better decisions, to be more clear in their purpose. Yes, it can do those things. But the deeper purpose, the deeper result of mindfulness training is a more kind, compassionate, and generous human being. And so as a side effect, you have this organization where 50,000 people are now being paid to do a practice that can help them become what I would call an awesome human being, to be the human beings that we all aspire to be. And so that's where I wanted to focus, is I realized if we can work with leaders of large organizations, help them realize benefit from the practice, then they're going to share it with everyone in their organization, or at least make it available. And that can help us tremendously in moving in the direction of creating the conditions for a world that does not have poverty and violence and other unnecessary suffering, because we have healthy human minds. And so the last piece of that is, well, how do you make that interesting to, a CEO or a senior leader in an organization? If you just say, oh, here's this practice that makes you real happy and lowers your blood pressure and, some of the standard benefits of the practice, people are going to say, I'm too busy for that. I have work to do. But if you can say, well, look, here's how mindfulness helps you be free from a cognitive bias and improves your decision making and has a direct impact on your profit and loss statement, now you've got their attention, right? Or if you can say, look, here's how mindfulness training changes the brain in ways that make you more emotionally intelligent, which is one of the key factors of driving engagement in your team and has results on your P&L. Now you've got their attention. So I think that's where the concern comes, is when people are saying, yes, this helps you with business, they're missing that the side effect of somebody engaging in the practice, if they practice properly, is that, yes, they may achieve better business outcomes, but at the same time, they're going to be a more kind, compassionate, generous human being. And with any luck, they will enjoy the practice enough that they want to share it with their team. And that could be a team of 50,000 people who then also become more kind, compassionate, and generous human beings.
I would agree with everything you said, Matt, and I would add on as a pushback to those questioning the ethics of presenting mindfulness in, say, a corporate setting or military or other settings that the individual making the criticism might find distasteful, is how morally appropriate is it for you to deny the practice to others in reducing their suffering? Is that also ethically positive? I would suggest maybe not so much. And Tim, how about you? What would you like to add to that? Or what are some of your thoughts on the ethics of introducing mindfulness in settings that are outside of a traditional context?
First of all, I have to say I really agree with everything that Matt just said. And I think if mindfulness is properly thought, if people are really becoming more mindful, if people are really making this shift, this also means a shift in ethics and getting more clarity. And I think that by itself will. So let's take the typical military example. If snipers get mindfulness training because this might enable them to better hit their targets. At the same time, they will become more clear about what their values are, and so there is an increase in awareness of ethics. And I think because of that, it can't be harmful. I think it can't be harmful to practice mindfulness and to teach mindfulness hands.
Well, our guests today have been Matt Tenney, and you can find out more about what we've been discussing today on the website, themindfulnessedge.com. Matt, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Ted. Thank you for having me. And I apologize if you hear my little one in the background. I think he just got his bottle taken away from him. So that's never a pleasant moment in life, you know.
That's an extra bonus guest on the podcast.
Yeah, he's far away, but he's got some good lungs, so you may be able to hear him there in the background.
And Tim Gard, Tim, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to talk to you again.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.